Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to another conversation on Global Village Media. Now, today we're having a conversation about something that so many people live with, but do not always stop to examine closely. The way work stress follows us beyond the working day and into our evenings, our sleep, and our overall well-being. Now, many people are tired, but not just physically tired, they're mentally switched on, emotionally stretched, and struggling to truly wind down. Even when the laptop is closed and the day is technically over, the mind may still be racing. The body may still be tense, and sleep may no longer feel as restful as it should be. And then over time, that can affect not only energy levels, but also mood, patience, performance, communication, and the way we relate to other people. And that's why today's conversation, I believe, is so important. Our topic today is why work stress follows us to bed. And we will be exploring why so many people feel tired all the time, why it can be so difficult to switch off mentally at night, and how poor sleep affects us during the day, and what practical changes individuals and workplaces can make to build healthier, more sustainable habits. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Jessie Favre. Now, Jessie is a workplace well-being expert, a member of the International Employee Assistance Professionals Association Speakers Bureau. Jessie regularly delivers sleep fitness programming to corporate audiences, and she brings a valuable perspective on the connection between stress, sleep, workplace culture, and everyday functioning. And also, what makes Jess's contribution especially valuable is that she helps us connect the dots between what many people are feeling personally and what is happening more broadly in the workplace. So this is not just a conversation about sleep in isolation. It's a conversation about how work patterns, pressure, mental overload, and everyday habits, how they quietly shape the quality of our rest and in turn the quality of our lives. So thank you so much, Jesse, for being so kindly to join us today on this conversation. It's a pleasure to have you with us on Global Village Media.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. So Jesse, let me start off by saying, when people say I'm tired all the time, what do you think is most often sitting behind that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it depends on the person, but I would say it often falls into one of three buckets. So it could be related to the sleep quantity, so how long you're sleeping. It
Mm,
could be related to sleep quality. And then there's also this like outside piece of maybe it's a different health condition that's affecting, fatigue or your energy levels.
mm, mm,
So
mm, mm.
if you're looking at the quantity, how much do we sleep? The CDC says we need at least 7 hours as an adult. And I know when I do sleep seminars, most people say they don't get it.
Mm.
In the US, the research shows about 1 in 3 people say that they don't get enough sleep. And so I know that that's something that affects a lot of people. And so if
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
consistently, not sleeping enough, you're going to feel that.
Mm,
And
mm.
also, it could be the quality. So
Yeah,
when we
yeah.
look at quality, we can definitely get more into how stress affects that. But it can also be something like exposure to lights. So
Mm,
we have a lot of blue light that comes in. And if you're checking your phone in the evening or you're watching TV before bed, that's something that can disrupt our circadian rhythm, which is like our
right.
internal body clock. It's
Yeah.
very, very sensitive to light.
Mm,
So
mm.
what happens is it actually suppresses the hormone in our body that helps us know to go to sleep, and that's melatonin. So that light can lead to really fragmented sleep. You might wake up and just feel absolutely exhausted. Or, like I said, it could be an outside health condition. And the reason I wanted to call that out is I just went through this. I
Mm,
was doing everything I knew to be right. And I went to
yeah.
my doctor and it took a lot of testing, but it was an iron deficiency. So
Wow.
I think it's important to just call out. Sometimes it's something totally different. And that's why you always want to make sure that you're in communication with your healthcare team so you can check
Mm,
those
mm.
things out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, good stuff there. And that's really key there. You said one in three people kind of suffer from that. So it's such a common experience then, isn't it? You know, yet for so many people that the reasons are not always obvious. So yeah, so good. Thanks for that, Jesse. And you also talk about the connection between stress and sleep problems. So again, why is that so hard for people to switch off mentally at night? I know you've kind of touched on that already, haven't you? Even anything else you to add that? Even when
Yeah,
they're
we can break this down.
yeah,
We can
yeah,
break this down.
mm,
I always go back to what is stress, first of all.
mm,
So, stress is our body's natural response to anything that we determine to be a challenge or a threat. So, it's essentially a demand. And
mm,
a lot of times we look at stress and we say, oh, it must be a bad thing. It must be distress. But there can be good energizing stress as well. That's also known as eustress. So, EU stress, one word.
mm,
So, if you think about stress in that way, and you think about your evening habits, I don't know about you, but I know for myself, I've
mm,
really had to work on this where I would check emails at night. And so let's just say you get a work email in, even if it's a positive thing, it's a project that
yeah,
you can't wait to get started on.
yeah,
Our stress response, a lot of times our sympathetic nervous system kicks on. It's like hitting the brakes, like the
mm,
gas, right? And we're
mm,
going to just
mm,
speed now. We're very alert.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
when we have this alertness right before we're trying to go to bed, it can be really difficult to fall asleep. On
mm,
top of that,
mm,
if you look at this from a psychological perspective,
mm,
when we have tasks that still need to get done and we're thinking about that, that can
mm,
relate to something called open loops in the
mm.
brain. So when we have a lot of loops that are open, that's something that can be very difficult to turn off when you're trying to go to bed.
Brilliant. Good, good, good. And a lot of people can relate to that, that feeling of being exhausted, but still not able to fully settle into their rest. Good. And
Mm-hmm.
you've also mentioned open loops in the brain. So please explain that in simple terms and
Mm-hmm.
why that keeps so many people awake.
Yeah, yeah. If you look up the term open loops, you're going to see a fancy name here, and that's the Zeigarnik effect.
Mm,
So the scientific community talks about the Zeigarnik effect. It's named after the psychologist who discovered this. But basically, what happens is I'll give you a metaphor. This is something that came up for me last week. My computer seemed like it was breaking down.
mm,
It was groggy. It was like sludging through the day. And I'm like, what is going on?
mm.
So I'm looking through everything and I have like 60 tabs open on my browser. So I was like, okay, there's way too much going on. The same thing
Mm,
basically happens inside of the brain. So
mm, mm,
we
mm.
tend to pay more attention to unfinished tasks as
Yeah,
compared to finished ones.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah,
if
yeah.
you have something coming up, it's like you've opened a tab on your
Mm.
browser. And for a lot of us, we have a lot of tabs open. And when we're like trying to go to bed, a lot of people will have this experience of going, oh my gosh, I need to remember,
Yeah.
at 9 o'clock tomorrow, I have to send that email. And when I go
Mm.
to the grocery store, I need to make sure I get coffee, whatever that situation may be. It's almost like a broken record
Yeah,
in our brain. It
yeah,
just randomly plays. That's
yeah.
the open loops.
Right,
So
right.
we need to think about ways that we can either close those loops or
Mm.
help the mind settle down.
Yeah,
And I can
yeah.
share with you a strategy that
Yeah,
came up in
please.
recent research that's really
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah.
So Baylor University did this study, and what they found is if you spend about 5 minutes before you go to bed
Mm.
just writing a very detailed to-do list, meaning you don't say tomorrow I'm going to find a new doctor. It's like, no, tomorrow I'm going to write this detailed list of like at 8 a.m. I log onto my insurance company's website, right? That helps the brain settle down because
Mm.
then the brain knows, okay, we've got a plan for this.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's one of those things that I would recommend doing before bed if you suffer with that feeling of like, okay, what's next that I have to get done?
Okay, good, good. Thanks. I really like that analogy, of having so many tabs open on the laptop, Very good analogy that makes that really kind of breaks the point down. Good. And then also a lot of people they treat poor sleep as normal. Kind of it's normalized, isn't it? So again, what does not getting enough good quality sleep actually do to our mood, to our focus and performance during the day?
Yeah. So from a mood perspective, we can be all over the place. And this is where I have to share. This is my favorite book on sleep. It's called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. So In this book, Dr. Matthew Walker likens it to a pendulum that's swinging.
Mm,
So if you've ever been sleep deprived and you get slap happy, that's the pendulum swinging over here, but it can just as easily swing the other direction.
yeah, yeah.
So from a mood perspective, we can be all over the place, and that emotional regulation can be really difficult. In terms of focus or performance, I always think about the example of drowsy driving because I think a lot of people can relate to this. It's a very dangerous thing. It's
Mm,
very dangerous. In fact, if you've been awake for 24 hours, it's the equivalent of a zero point 0.1 blood alcohol concentration level, which would be for the average size adult drinking 4 to 5 drinks in an hour.
mm.
So, what can happen is we can have a delayed response. So, we might hit the brake, but we hit it too late.
Mm.
We can also have micro sleep, which means that even for just a couple of seconds, we're not responsive. And in those couple of seconds, that could be safety critical. So when we think about performance, we've always got to think about in our jobs, what would happen if we have micro sleep? What would
Mm.
happen if there's a delay in our response? And then, even from a performance standpoint, there's this learning piece that we need. So when we're trying to take new information in and file it away in storage, we need sleep for that.
Right.
When we're
Yeah.
trying to take information in and come up with creative solutions, we need sleep for that. So when we're
Yeah.
sleep deprived, we are in a position where we just can't perform as well.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. And then also from a workplace point of view, how does that poor sleep affect how people again further communicate? You've kind of touched on making decisions and responding to others.
Mm-hmm. Well, it can impact us in a lot of ways. So, one of the things that happens when we're sleep deprived, it's so much harder to read somebody else's facial expression.
Mm,
So we all have different levels of how good we are at that, but it becomes harder when we haven't slept. And we tend to assume negative intent.
yeah.
So yeah, I can actually give you an example of how this came up for me recently.
Mm,
Um, I was doing a podcast episode, and the night before, I had not been able to get to sleep. There was a storm. So I'm doing this podcast episode, and the whole time I'm thinking this interviewer does not like me, and I'm panicking. And I get done with it. I actually cried. And again, if you think about
wow.
that pendulum swinging, I was sleep deprived.
Mm.
So what made me laugh is I watched this episode later, and this person is nothing but nice to me. So if we're going through our workday like this and we're like,
Mm,
oh my gosh, everybody doesn't like me, you can see how that really starts to impact the way that we're showing up with each other. And you were talking about how like decisions get made at work. We tend to get really impulsive when we
mm.
haven't slept.
Yeah.
So, if you think about how the brain works, there's kind of two major things to think about here. One is we have an emergency response part of the brain, which is called the amygdala, and that can go off if there's a threat. We perceive there
Mhm.
to be a threat, and that's fight, flight, freeze. It sends information like from the amygdala to the lower limbic system. There's another part of the brain that's up here, and that's the prefrontal cortex. It's the part of the
Mm,
brain that's very new, relatively speaking. It's
mhm.
very human. It's really good at making plans, like the things that we want
Mm,
to do at work. When we haven't slept, the amygdala gets riled up, the emergency response center. It makes it harder to get into the prefrontal cortex. And so when we're interacting with people, maybe we get snippy. We think that there's some sort of social threat going on. And
mhm,
also, when we make decisions, we're making decisions from that lower limbic system. Like we are coming from that fight, flight, freeze. And a lot of times that's not called for. And we don't get to as good of an outcome as we could
mhm.
have if we could have tapped into the good critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, good. And I think kind of what you've explained there is that it actually becomes bigger at the end of the day. The deprivation comes bigger than just feeling tired when it begins to affect daily functioning and relationships. Good, thanks. So,
Yeah.
and what are some of the most common habits or routines that quietly undermine sleep without people actually realizing it?
hmm I think for a lot of people, I brought up the blue lights, but if you
Mm,
are, exposed to screen time an hour
mm,
or 2 hours before
mhm,
bed, that's
mhm,
probably impacting your sleep.
Mm,
And I know for a lot of people, it's helpful or it feels helpful to, put a movie on. But I can't tell you how many sleep seminars I've done where I ask people, what do you consume before bed? What do you watch before bed? True crime over and over. And I'm like, this is the most stressful thing you could be watching right before you go to sleep. So, like, not
yeah.
only is it the blue lights, but you may have stress that's coming in. So, we have to be mindful of that. So, I think
Mm,
stress and blue lights, caffeine can also be an issue.
mm, mm,
Now, with caffeine, everybody metabolizes caffeine a little bit differently, but the general rule of thumb is you need 8 to 10 hours from the last caffeinated drink before you go to bed. And that's a wide window. So for people who are drinking caffeine in the afternoon, that's really something that could be a problem.
mm,
And then I
mm.
would say the other thing that sneaks up on a lot of people is they're just not really consistent about the time that they wake up or they go to bed. And they think, oh, over the weekend, I'm just going to catch up on my sleep. I'll just sleep in more. Yeah, it's it's not
Never
training the
do.
body
Yeah.
to understand
Mm,
exactly. Yeah, so those are the major things that I think can sneak up in a really quiet way, and it can really have a huge impact on your health.
good, good, good. And again, they're really, really important because so many of us are doing so many things, that seem harmless, but are actually working against us, at the end of the day. Yeah. So let's talk about sleep hygiene. So when we talk about sleep hygiene, what practical changes tend to make the biggest differences in real everyday life?
Well, I think one of the things you can do is just go into your sleep environment and just do a quick audit on it.
Mm,
So,
mm,
are you comfortable in your
mm,
sleep space?
mm.
Do you need to flip your mattress? A lot of
Mm.
people forget to do that. So, look that up for your specific mattress.
Okay.
A
Okay.
lot of people will get like it looks like a little hammock. So, if you're kind of in that hammock, it may be time to either get a new mattress or flip that. Could be
Mm,
you get
mm.
yourself some new pillows if you're able to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make sure you've got comfortable pajamas on. Think about the temperature of the room.
Mm,
For most people, they need to, if possible, reduce that temperature a little bit before bed. If
yeah.
you're not in a position where you can do that, you could take something like a warm bath or shower
Mm,
because when you come out, it'll actually, that feeling of being flushed will then lead to your body temperature dropping. So that's another way that you could look at that.
yeah.
You can
Yeah.
also think
Yeah.
about your routines. So a lot of people have like a nighttime routine. They start to get away from the screens. They move towards things that are really relaxing for them.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
so
mm.
again, I think that just helps train your brain to know what to do there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then, really make sure that you've got a strong connection between your sleep space and sleep. So for me, especially during the pandemic, when a lot of people started working from home and we had our offices all over our homes,
Yeah.
people were working from their bedroom, and I was one of those people. And so then you go into your sleep space and you're thinking about work or paying the bills or all these things you have to get done. So if
Yeah.
you wake up at night, get out of that sleep space, go do your thing and come back in. But ideally, when you go do your thing, it's not involving more screens and like getting into work that's going to trigger a stress response. But
Yeah.
we want to
Yeah.
keep like a really clean association between that space and going to bed.
Mm, 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 mm. Yeah, I found myself real guilty of that during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
sending emails at 2:30 in the morning and
Yep.
yeah. So I'm guessing, Jesse, that it's kind of like a no-no to have a TV. What's your take on having a TV in the bedroom?
uh, it's not, so it's something I used to do and it's something that I
Mm,
stopped doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't think that it's going to be helpful because from a blue light perspective, when I'm talking about blue light, even before we had all the screens, we get blue light from
Mm,
the sun.
yeah.
So it's really mimicking that feeling of being in the sun. So this is
Mm,
something that is a very high energy, high frequency type of light that we're exposed to,
mm,
and it's very confusing for the body about what time of day it is. And
yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
if what's helpful for you is listening to something, you might explore other ways that you could listen to something before bed that's relaxing.
Right.
But that light, I do think, is something that for
Yeah.
most people will actually interrupt their
Mm.
sleep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good, yeah, good stuff. And what can individuals and workplaces do differently to create healthier sleep habits and more sustainable work culture?
I think the low hanging fruit in a lot of teams that I've worked with is there's not explicit norms about how people communicate with each other after hours.
mm,
And, even as a business owner, I went through this where I used to not tell my clients like when they could text or not text. And so I may get a text coming in at 10 p.m. and there's nothing wrong.
mm,
It'll say, you don't need
mm,
to do anything till tomorrow. But
mm,
I
mm,
see that text and then again, I'm alert, right?
mm,
So I think in a lot
mm,
of teams, people need to talk about this. And as a group, you make a decision. When it's this hour, we don't text each other or we don't Slack each other unless, and you
mm,
clearly define what urgent means. And that way, everybody's on the same page. And this isn't about encouraging people to do less work or lowering the standards. It's actually saying we know
yeah.
scientifically that sleep supports our better performance at work. This is
Mm,
actually in
mm,
benefit of work and our well being. How great.
mm,
So we
yeah.
need to be very clear and respect that. And I do think, too, a lot of times organizations have sleep related resources and people don't know it. So companies that have something like an employee assistance program that might link people to mental health support often have
Yeah.
people who come in
Yeah.
and they teach about sleep fitness. So
Mm,
just
mm,
making sure
mm,
you know what resources are available through your job
yeah.
can be helpful, and then
Yeah.
you let people know that they're out there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really key there. I remember somebody got an email once from their boss, like around about 4 o'clock in the morning, and they were disturbed, you know. It had a really big negative impact on their work relationship, you know, because yeah. But good, thank you for that insight.
Mhm.
And how can they model healthier sleep and recovery habits without feeling like they're lowering standards?
Mhm. You just named an example that I think is one of the most important things to think about, and that
Mm,
is that middle of the night email that goes
mm,
out.
mm, mm, mm,
So, part of the work that I do is leadership development work. And I always tell leaders that message that you just sent at 4 in the morning has nothing to do with what you just typed in there. The
mm.
message you just sent is that we don't sleep here,
Right.
because people will watch and it sets an expectation, even if you didn't mean for it to. I
Mm.
actually had this conversation with one of my supervisors. I had started a job in the past. First week on the job, I got one of those 4 a.m. emails. And I said, I noticed the email came in at 4 a.m. and I just wanted to touch base on that. She
Mm,
said, oh my gosh, I just happened to be awake.
mm.
I didn't mean anything by that. You can sleep. But I think the thing everybody has to remember, there is more that's caught than taught. So if you're a leader, you can tell people, oh, it's really important you sleep. But if you show people you don't sleep by sending emails in the middle of the night, or you
Mm.
brag to your team that you only need 3 hours of sleep a night, which I see
Yeah,
leaders do
yeah,
all the
yeah,
time, I'm like,
yeah.
don't do it, because more is caught than taught. And so there's
Mm.
even studies that look at the sleep differences for people who report to a supervisor who brags about sleeping less. So it's correlation. We don't know for sure it's causation, but
Mm.
their direct reports actually sleep less.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
contagious,
yeah,
essentially, from a
yeah.
social contagion standpoint. So
Mm.
showing up, being a good model for these things is important. And even if you don't sleep much, schedule the email to go out the next
Yeah,
day.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Good. That's good, good. And for someone listening right now who feels tired, wired, or stretched, what are the first two or three changes that you would suggest that they start with?
Okay. The first one you're not going to like
Mm.
if you don't do this already.
Mm.
Consistent wake up time. And I'm talking
Right.
7 days a week.
Mm.
This is something that I did. And it's extreme because on the weekend I will be up at 7, every day. But that's so helpful for training the body of when it's time to get up. And then naturally you start to get tired around the same time. So I would say
Mm.
consistent wake up time.
Mm.
I also
Mm.
feel really strongly about addressing those open loops by making that detailed list of what needs to get done the next day at night.
Mm.
So get up the same time, write your list in the evening. And then the third thing, and again, this is coming from my personal experience, if you're doing all the things that you read about and hear about for sleep fitness and you're still tired, go talk to your medical team.
Yeah, yeah,
There
yeah.
are so many sleep disorders, there's so many health conditions that affect your energy level. And a lot of these things can be really serious if you don't address
Mm.
it. So you always want to make sure that if you're not feeling like your energy is getting better, that you talk to the right professional so that
Right.
you can get that help that you need.
Mm, good. But with regard to what you said about sleep, waking up the same time every day. So someone who's wired to wake up at 4 a.m. every day, and how can they stretch that maybe to wake up at 7 instead, or maybe even 6 instead of 4 a.m.?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because we all have different times that we are more awake.
Mm, mm, mm,
So
mm.
there is kind of a distribution of people who are early morning people, afternoon people, and evening people. And it's largely determined by our genetics.
Okay.
So even somebody who wants to be an early morning person, but they're just not, they may be able to wake up, but that prefrontal cortex, the critical thinking part of their brain, is still kind of snoozing. It's offline.
Mm, mm,
So
mm,
that's a shame for morning meetings, by the way, at companies, because there's going to be a subset of employees that just aren't like fully awake yet.
mm.
So if you're just more wired to be awake early hours, that may just be how you're wired to be awake. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't have a good recommendation for how to change
Mm,
where you get
mm.
your energy burst because
Yeah,
I do
yeah,
think
yeah.
it's so largely driven by your genetics.
Okay, yeah. Because the only reason why I was asking is that because that 4 a.m., there might be no need. It could be that they went to bed at 12 midnight. So basically, they've slept for
Mm.
4 hours and they don't really need to wake up, but they just can't sleep. They can't go back to sleep and get the right, quality of sleep. Um, but anyway, Jesse, thank you so much. I think for joining us and for sharing your insights. I believe so clearly and practically. I think this has been such an important conversation because it reminds us that sleep is not separate from the rest of our lives. The pressure we carry through the day, the habits we normalize, and the cultures we work within all have a real impact on how well that we rest, recover, and function. What has come through strongly in this discussion is that tiredness should not always be brushed aside as something normal or inevitable. When stress keeps following us all into the night, it affects our mood, our concentration, our relationships, decision making, and overall well being. So, Jesse, before I let you go, could you please leave one final word for the visitors, for the viewers?
So I would actually argue that sleep is part of your own self care.
Hmm,
Self care is the intentional act of meeting your needs. And so my final comment here is that self care is not selfish. You
hmm,
can't pour from an empty cup. So if
absolutely.
you feel like you're not showing up for the people around you, you always have to look back at how can I direct resources to myself.
Hmm.
There's nothing that's selfish about this. And so if that's helpful for anybody, I hope that's what you take away.
Good, good, good. So thank you again, Jess, for helping us unpack these issues and for sharing practical steps that can help everyone begin to apply into everyday life. So, folks, thank you for everyone listening. I hope this conversation has encouraged you or will encourage you to think more carefully about the connection between your work stress, sleep, and well-being. Sometimes a problem is not simply what we need more hours in bed, but we need healthier rhythms, better boundaries, and a culture that does not mistake constant strain for success. So, this has been another Global Village Media production. Until next time, let's keep learning, let's keep reflecting, and let's keep taking steps towards better health, wellness, and well being. And let's also remember that in a world where we can be anything that we want to be, let's remember to be kind to ourselves and be kind to others. Thank you so much, y'all. Remain blessed.